Penelope Fitzgerald is really a hidden gem, a hidden treasure of English literature, of world literature, and I can only encourage you to go out and buy her books and read them and enjoy them as they should be. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today a magical writer, Penelope Fitzgerald, and a great book, The Bookshop. Penelope Fitzgerald was an English woman. She was born in 1916 and she died in 2000, about 25 years ago. And The Bookshop that I want to highlight today is a book from 1978. Now, Penelope Fitzgerald is well known. At the same time, she is completely unknown. And that is one of the aspects that we want to talk about later on. In fact, one of the reasons that she didn't shoot to fame like many other writers is that she started writing extremely late in her life. And by the time she started publishing in earnest as a novelist, she was well into her 50s and 60s. She continued writing for a while, and then her last book is from 1997, a historical novel, The Blue Flower, a beautiful novel set in the Romantics in Germany. A romantic movement in Germany. The Bookshop is from 78. Famous books, let's say, that made her more of a household name in English literature are Offshore, which won a prize, 79. Human Voices, a semi-autobiographical novel set in a BBC during the Second World War, is from 1980, I'm sorry. She also wrote At Freddy's, set in the theatrical world, the London theatrical world, something that she knew because she had been part of it herself. She had been an actress or actor when she was younger. So At Freddy's in 1982. A beautiful, absolutely wonderful novel, The Beginning of Spring from 1988. A remarkable novel. And this is the bulk of her writing. She also has a published volume of letters that are quite interesting, in fact, very mundane mostly, and also revealing of her character. Very strong character, very independent character. She also wrote some non-fiction, and notably she published on the history of her family. Why is it relevant to talk about Penelope Fitzgerald today when her books are not massive bestsellers and she has been dead for a quarter of a century? Well, really, I think she highlights a couple of things about literature in general that are very interesting to us, on top of The Bookshop, this novel from 1978 being absolutely excellent. The first thing that we'll want to discuss is issues of style, really, and subtlety in style, which will link, of course, very easily to craftsmanship. That is, how do you attain that style? How do you do what she does? Of course, The Bookshop is very interesting in itself as a novel and as a constructed novel, and also interesting for some of the themes she touches upon, which are not necessarily major themes in her writing, but in this one, certainly, issues of class are quite present at least. And we'll finish off by celebrating that invisible literature that you do not necessarily find very easily in bookshops or online. They're not necessarily coming at you through algorithms, and yet Penelope Fitzgerald is one of those authors whom anyone really invested in literature, from writers to readers, knows about, but she's one of those really well-kept secrets at the same time. So what is the story of The Bookshop, this novel from 78? Well, it's really a very simple one. A middle-aged woman, now alone, decides to go into the countryside that is away from London, where she lives, and decides to buy a bookshop, or at least she buys business premises, which she turns into a bookshop. This bookshop is set in a smallish village, and it is, of course, an opportunity for Penelope Fitzgerald to look at social relations in a small village, halfway, let's say, through the century, a little bit after the Second World War, and also throw in some glimpses, some looks at how such a society was organized, what was the weight of the past in terms of traditions and class, and also what was the place of women. Now, what is remarkable about Penelope Fitzgerald is how easy she is to read. Her writing style is extremely simple and subdued, some would say. It is sparse in the sense that she doesn't make long, flowery sentences. It's loaded with irony, but not irony that you like laugh out loud when you see it. Irony where you think, yeah, oh, I see that one. Irony, which is again tempered and even tempered, and yet knows exactly when to strike and what to strike at. In other words, she's not mean, she's not acerbic in any way, but she is ironic, and she can observe very well. Her sentences are, let's say, normal in the sense of they're not overly long or they're not Hemingway-like. They are light, that's true, in the sense of they don't impose themselves on you. They're not heavy sentences that you've got to read 3 times to understand what she means. And in fact, sometimes you may think, well, it's nothing. It's too light. There's not enough substance to them. But of course, you have understood by now, if you read and like to read, that style is not in the heaviness of sentences. Style can equally be in the accumulation of light, feather-light sentences and observations, which taken together give you this incredible world within one paragraph. In other words, it feels like Penelope Fitzgerald is not working at the style, she's not working at being a good writer, but in fact, I'm sure she was very talented, but equally I'm sure that she actually refined and polished those sentences. It doesn't look complex, but it's very hard to do. And that's the craftsmanship, of course, in her style, is how does one manage to combine such lightness, such apparently simplicity, with a text full of observations, full of remarks, full of ideas about the world, full of commentaries on the people in the book. Of course, in that village where that woman sets up the bookshop, there are, as usual, class divisions. That's following the Second World War, that class structure was still very, very strongly in place. If you are interested in this, you can read, there's a autobiography by this actor-director, Michael Blakemore, an Australian who comes to England right at the beginning of the 50s, and that's the thing that he says really impressed him the most when he arrived in England, is how strong the class system was and how everything was determined along the lines of the class system. So of course it plays a part in the bookshop as well, because you have this sort of landed gentry, the lord of the village, as it were. To be admitted there, of course, is the hope and the aspiration of everybody, but few are chosen. Of course, that woman, being on her own, being at the head of a bookshop, finally will get invited to those places, and that's the occasion for her, and for Penelope Fitzgerald, of course, to give us a portrait of such a village and the English society at the time. Again, it sounds very ethnographic. That is not at all the case. It's always very light, always very ironic, like as if she was not really doing it, but she is doing it really. And of course, when you encounter this landed gentry, you realize that such a system is very much based on traditions and money, than it is on, well, learning and knowing and thinking. At the same time, of course, this craftsmanship of Penelope Fitzgerald looks, as I said, very simple, but is extremely hard to attain. And if you think about another novel that she wrote, The Beginning of Spring, from 1988, The Beginning of Spring is set in Russia, and it is the same. It is so light that it looks almost inexistent. That it looked like something you could read in an hour and just forget about it immediately. And that is the power of this craftsmanship. That is why Penelope Fitzgerald is still so celebrated today within literary circles, is that even though it's light and it looks like nothing, it remains with you. It really occupies a place in you. You do not throw it away at the end. It remains with you because she has a way of making something weighty with perfect lightness of style. And that is why she is one of the most remarkable writers that the last 50 years have produced in England, certainly. Now, when she does talk about class in England, she also, of course, talks about gender. Remember, this is a single woman after the Second World War, buying her own business, selling books on her own, organizing it all on her own, doing the accounts on her own, without a man around. And that, of course, is bound to create some questions in the mind of those villagers and in the mind of that small society at the time. You all know, of course, Madame Bovary, the Flaubert novel from the 19th century. You remember that Madame Bovary is set in a small village in Normandy, in France. Well, think about sort of the same setting in England a century later, with different people. So that's all the same thing. But at the same time, of course, the same idea. How does a small society, which exists away from the real world, that was London, or that would have been Paris in Flaubert's time, of course, and how does such a society sustain itself? How does it operate? How do they look on newcomers? How do they look on women? How do they look on themselves? And it's just a fantastic tiny book. The Bookshop is maybe 150, 160 pages at the most. It's a fantastic little look at this. Never mean, never angry, but ironic and funny enough and light enough that it reveals a whole world underneath the surface of that village. Now, of course, Penelope Fitzgerald, as I said, is celebrated, is beloved of writers and readers who know her, quite simply because she is an exceptional talent. She has an exceptionally light touch, while being at the same time extremely observant and loading her sentences with meaning. Not in a difficult way, again, in a very simple way, and yet sometimes a very simple sentence can carry an enormous lot of meaning. And that is why Penelope Fitzgerald is so wonderful. And she is part of that invisible literature, which is a very accessible, high literature in some ways, meaningful, easy to read, and that combination is very often in the mind of the people impossible. Real literature has got to be complex, it's got to be difficult, and if it's too easy to read, then it doesn't mean anything. Well, no, she is part of those who really show that you can blend both worlds, extreme readability with extreme or extremely interesting and loaded content. When she talks, of course, about those issues of class, then you are probably reminded of two other English writers, female writers at the same time, kind of the same time. Muriel Spark, of course. If you don't know, for example, the Ballad of Peckham Rye, less easy to read, I have to admit. The style is very different from Penelope Fitzgerald's, but this is a wonderful exploration of English class at the same time. And of course, a favorite of mine, Beryl Bainbridge, who has two sort of careers, and the historical novels and then the very semi-autobiographical novels. And in those, growing up in England, the social class is ever present, and Beryl Bainbridge, just like Penelope Fitzgerald, is one of those writers who can be extremely funny. Bainbridge is more funny, much funnier than Penelope Fitzgerald. Benbridge can also be very mean at times, or some of her criticism, some of her irony bites more than Penelope Fitzgerald, but she has some of the same concerns, only when it comes to class and when it comes to describing English society at the time. So Penelope Fitzgerald, with the Bookshop, wrote really a masterpiece of contemporary English fiction. But I can only encourage you to read her other books. The Blue Flower, the last one, the historical novel one, is really the only one of its kind. It's also the longest by far, because typically Offshore, Human Voices, Innocence, Beginning of Spring, The Gate of Angels, all those books are very, very tiny. They're between 150, 170 pages. They're easy to find, they're easy to read, but do not forget, do not mistaken ease of reading with lack of depth. There is great depth. It is not a philosophical depth, perhaps, that you may expect from this or that writer, but it is a different kind of depth. It is delicate and yet meaningful. That is rare. So fit. Penelope Fitzgerald is really a hidden gem, a hidden treasure of English literature, of world literature, and I can only encourage you to go out and buy her books and read them and enjoy them as they should be. Let me know perhaps in the comments if you have a favorite Penelope Fitzgerald novel. Is it also perhaps in her non-fiction or the letters that you enjoyed? Let me know if you knew her, and if ever you read some of her novels or will read some of those novels, let me know as well in the comments. Bye bye.